Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Professor Peter Teachout, who will be making some introductory remarks for our keynote speaker, Senator Tester. When we were deciding who should introduce Senator Tester, Professor Teachout's name immediately flew to the top of the list. As a legend of Vermont Law School, he has been teaching law here for over 45 years, and I had the pleasure of learning the nuances of First Amendment law from him. A veteran and an advocate, we thought it would be no better to introduce the chair of Veterans Affairs Committee than a man on the ground. Everyone, please welcome Professor Peter Teachout.
Thank you, Caitlin. If I'm at the top of the list right now, I'll probably be at the bottom of the list by the time I'm through this evening. Look, my name is Peter Teachout. I'm a professor of constitutional law at Vermont Law School, and it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce Senator Jon Tester from Montana, who will be our keynote speaker this evening. Senator Tester is currently serving his third term in the United States Senate, where he serves as chair of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. He's on the Appropriations Committee, the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, the Committee on Science and Commerce and Transportation, and also the Committee on Indian Affairs. He was first elected to the Senate in 2006 when he won a squeaker, defeating his Republican opponent with 49% of the vote compared to his opponent's 48%. In the second run, he slipped a little bit, coming in with only 48% of the vote, but he beat his Republican opponent by a wider margin because there was a libertarian in the race. In his third run, which was in 2018, he won by a comparable landslide for the first time, coming in with just over 50% of the votes. The first time he ever broke 50%. So the guy knows how to run tight, competitive races. Senator Tester's relationship with number 45, former President Trump, might be described as a close one. During Senator Tester's last run for the Senate back in 2018, Trump personally visited Montana 4 times to campaign against Senator Tester. Trump was not successful in that effort, but anyway, they've developed something of a relationship through that exchange of views. And so that should make the senator particularly qualified to serve as a keynote of this symposium, which is dedicated to exploration of the legitimacy, legality, and legacy of number 45. I'd like to say just a few words about the senator's personal story and his politics. I understand he's going to be arriving just a little bit late this evening, so if I could share just a couple of stories with you, I think you'd find that he's really a pretty interesting guy. So, Senator Tester's a Montana native. He was born and grew up in the central northern part of Montana in a town called Big Sandy. If you think South Royalton, Vermont is a small town located stuck off in the middle of nowhere, you should see Big Sandy. In the 2020 census, South Royalton had a population of 694 people. Big Sandy had a population of 598 people. So South Royalton is about 100 people ahead of Big Sandy right now. And that doesn't count the student population in South Royalton. So compared with Big Sandy, South Royalton is a metropolis. Just to give you some idea, you really ought to check Big Sandy out on the internet if you get a chance, but just to give you some idea what it's like. The main landmark in town used to be a huge water tower rising above the landscape. When they tore the water tower down a couple years ago, the people of Big Sandy had to find a new landmark. They finally decided on a puddle that occasionally appears on the main street after a rain. It's called the puddle, and that is Big Sandy's new landmark. You might think, coming from a place like Big Sandy, Senator Tester is its most famous native son. And there's some basis for that, because when you're driving into town, you see the sign Big Sandy, and it's got home of Senator Jon Tester on it. But in fact, Senator Tester has a serious rival for that title. Big Sandy, as it turns out, is also the hometown of a guy named Jeff Ament, the lead bass player for a group called Pearl Jam. I don't know whether you've heard of Pearl Jam, but I understand the music they play is called grunge. Senator Tester and his wife, they have two daughters. The senator and his wife still farm a parcel of land near Big Sandy, originally homesteaded by Senator Tester's grandfather back in the early 1900s. He went to college in Montana, graduating with a degree in music, and after graduation served for a couple of years as a music teacher in the local schools. I don't think the kind of music he taught was called grunge, but I just don't know. In any event, he started off his career in politics in the best possible way that one can if you want to learn how to take political flack, by serving on the local school board. He spent 5 years as chairman of the Big Sandy School Board of Trustees. He then got into politics at the state level, running for office as a Democrat in the legislature of a state that at the time was predominantly Republican, very much like Vermont was back in the early 60s. He clearly was doing something right, because he eventually ended up as president of the Montana State Senate. I didn't know this before, but apparently they have term limits in Montana state politics. So when Senator Tester exhausted his allotted number of terms in the state legislature, couldn't continue to run there, so he ran for the US Senate. That was back in 2006, and he's been in the US Senate ever since. I want to encourage you, if there's a chance during question and answer period, to ask Senator Tester about his politics. I can give you just a rough idea about his politics in these introductory comments. He describes himself as a, quote, moderate or centrist Democrat. What a centrist Democrat is, he described once in his own words. He said, I am, quote, truly your grandfather's Democrat. Pro-gun, anti-big business, prairie pragmatist, whose life is defined by a treeless patch of Montana hard dirt that's been in the family since 1916. Pretty good, pretty good. Life defined by a treeless patch of Montana hard dirt. Okay. I think the best way to describe what a centrist Democrat's politics are is to say, wherever you happen to be on the political spectrum, you are likely to disagree with him at least 50% of the time. During the Obama years, Senator Tester voted generally, but not always, with Obama. Although he was attacked back in Montana for having done so, he supported the Affordable Care Act. He's always been a strong supporter of developing and providing a system of effective health care for the people of this country. He justified his support for the Affordable Care Act by saying he thought the act, quote, had some good stuff in it. Here's a Vermonter for you. Yeah, the act's got some good stuff in it. So Like Obama and many others at the time, at first he didn't support same-sex marriage, but also like Obama, he eventually came around. After the Supreme Court decided the Obergefell case, holding there's a constitutional right to same-sex marriage, the senator praised the decision as protecting gays' rights and freedoms. Voting on confirmation of Supreme Court justices. Senator Tester voted to confirm Obama nominees Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan, but he was not as enthusiastic about Trump nominees Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, and he voted against both. He also voted against approving Trump's most recent nominee, Amy Coney Barrett. Now, Senator Tester is a gun owner and a hunter, and he's from Montana. I will let you ask him about his position on Second Amendment and gun rights, and I encourage you to do so. Most of us, like myself, who grew up in Vermont, also are hunters and gun owners. But in Vermont, we don't believe you need an automatic weapon or a semi-automatic weapon or a clip with added capacity to go out and shoot a deer during hunting season. We believe, as did the pioneers who settled this part of America and who understood when they ratified the Second Amendment what it meant, they believed that one shot ought to do it. That was the meaning of the Second Amendment. That is and ought to be the meaning of the Second Amendment. I don't think Senator Tester would agree with that, but that at least is what we believe here in Vermont. As I say, I'll let Senator Tester tell you if you ask him what his own position is on gun rights. Oh, let's see, on energy and climate change. I'm under the impression that generally Senator Tester is a supporter of green energy. Let me simply say that doesn't necessarily mean that he opposed the Keystone Pipeline. On immigration policy, I suspect Senator Tester's politics are not shared by most of you in the audience this evening. I will leave it to him to share his views on that subject as well. As Senator Tester says, he's a, quote, centrist Democrat, close quote, pro-gun, anti-big business, a prairie pragmatist. So, one final note. Our keynote speaker this evening, Senator Tester, was on Capitol Hill on January 6th this year when, spurred on by former President Trump, the Capitol was overrun by a mob seeking to overturn the results of the presidential election. He was in his office, Senator Tester was in his office at the Hart Senate office building when the Capitol was breached. I don't know exactly what his situation was, but I believe he was ushered to safety along with the other senators. His description of the event that day, however, suggests he was not favorably impressed by the demonstration. He called it a despicable and dangerous attack on our democracy, a coup by domestic terrorists. I'm afraid the event may have led to a little strain in his relationship with his fellow senator from Montana, Senator Daines, who supported Trump's fraudulent claims of a stolen election. Senator Tester called his fellow senator, quote, an enabler, close quote. But he was there that day, and if he has a chance this evening, I think it'd be really interesting to hear what he has to say about it. With that little bit of background, then, it's my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker this evening, Senator Jon Tester from Montana. I hope he's arrived by now. He's a fascinating guy with incredibly impressive political credentials, and a unique perspective on the topic of our symposium this year. If you're here, Senator Tester, let me just say personally, if they ever kick you out of Montana, you will be welcomed here in Vermont. And if you want to run for politics in this state, you might have to move to the left just a little, but not as far left as Bernie. Otherwise, I think you would fit right in. Welcome.
Well, I just want to say thank you all for having me. It is a great privilege to speak with the folks from the Vermont Law Symposium. So thank you for having me. Before I begin, though, I want to give a quick Montana shout out to Lauren Wustenberg and Kelsey Schweitzer. Both are relatives of folks that I think a lot of. And in fact, when they found out that I was speaking, they said, could you check and make sure they're doing fine? Hopefully you guys will have some questions for me. But the bottom line is I'm going to talk for a little bit here, kind of tell you where I come from, and I will deal with the insurrection on January 6th. And then I really kind of want to throw it over to you guys to ask questions, because I think that's the most fun, and we can find out what's on your mind, and you can agree or disagree with where I'm coming from. So I do live on a piece of treeless ground in north central Montana. The prairies were 150 years ago. Buffalo had a hard time eking out a living. But since my grandfather came here in the early teens and patented this land in 1915 and retired in 43, and my folks took it over and retired in 1978, and then my wife and I have been farming ever since. Agriculture is, it's not only a big part of my life, it's really who I am. Agriculture has been part of me literally from my earliest memory. When I got to be about 8 years old, I made the decision that I wanted to be a farmer, and I told my folks that. And so I am very blessed because I've been able to do something for the entire 64 years that I've been on this earth, something that I really, really love. From a political standpoint, I guess I got my start in politics when I was a junior in high school, and they loaded all the juniors and seniors up to go to the state capitol, and I got to see the Montana State Legislature in action. As a 16-year-old, I thought that was pretty cool. It was the first time I'd ever been in the state capitol in Montana. And I thought, one of these days, God willing, I'm going to run for the state legislature. And and in fact, when I proposed to my wife, that was one of the stipulations, is that at some point in time she was going to have to put up with me running for public office. Didn't know if I'd win or not, but the truth is that that was big for me. So when I got out of college, after getting my Bachelor of Science in Music, and while I was teaching and farming, because I took the farm over in the spring of '78, which is the same year I graduated from college, I got involved with a lot of public service. I served on the conservation board. I served on the school board. I served on the FSA board, which deals with farm programs and benefits and money. And in 1998, had the opportunity to run for the state legislature because my neighbor was stepping down. My neighbor was a Republican, and I wasn't going to run against him because he was a longtime family friend. But he stepped down, and I ran, and we worked hard. In fact, we worked on that race for 10 months straight. Normally, when people start working on a legislative race, it's usually after the 4th of July or after Labor Day. I started working the 1st of January and started doing doors the 1st of February. And we just flat out worked the opponent. The opponent was an incumbent of sorts. He has served in the House district, and every Senate district in Montana consists of 2 House districts put together. He had served in the 1 House district for a number of years, but nonetheless, hard work, the same kind of hard work that my folks taught me to do, whether it was picking rock out in the field or picking hay bales or sitting on a tractor for 18 hours at a stretch. That same work ethic paid off for me when I ran for the state legislature. And I won by 11 points in a district that was predominantly Republican. But as one person told me after that race was over, Jon, if you work as hard once you get in office as you work getting this office, you will serve your constituents well. And so I served for 8 years in the state legislature, 6 of those years in a leadership position. And in 2006, decided to run against a 3-term incumbent by the name of Conrad Burns. Once again, we went to work and we worked hard. To be honest with you, Senator Burns made a few mistakes. I was able to capitalize on those unforced errors by me, and I won by 3,562 votes in November of 2006. In fact, a friend of mine gave me this hat as a commemorative of that. It happens to be sitting on my light here, so I thought I'd show it to you, the number of votes that I won that race by. And since then, I have won 2 additional races past the first one, so I've just finished my 14th year in the U.S. Senate. I have served basically on these 5 committees since I got there. They are Appropriations, Banking, Commerce, Indian Affairs, and Veterans Affairs. I currently am chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee, and I'm also chairman of the Defense Subcommittee on Appropriations, which oversees more than half of the money that's appropriated. So they're both big positions. As far as January 6th goes, and we can get into special issues with your questions and my answers. But as far as January 6th goes, it was something that I never ever thought I would see in this country. The president invited people to come that day because it was when we count the electoral ballots, something that in the past had just been done as a matter of course. But the president wanted to challenge this count and invited the folks in. If you watched the impeachment trial, that's probably not the first time you heard those terms. The president invited people to come to Washington, D.C. on the 6th of January because he did. And ultimately, after speeches that I saw over the last 8 months and culminated with the speech in the Ellipse on January 6th, we saw a bunch of folks head to the Capitol. Some of them had pretty bad intentions on their mind. They wanted to kill people, quite frankly. And I could well have been one of them. But I was in my office in Hart Building, and I watched as the people showed up, and then I watched on TV as they broke down the first set of barricades and went up the steps. And I said to my 2 members that I had because of COVID, the 2 members of my staff that were in my office, that they're going to breach the Capitol, something that I never ever thought would happen. But I never realized how undermanned the Capitol Police were in this situation, which is why there needs to be an investigation. And I support the investigation to find out why things happened as they did, why the National Guard didn't get there for a long time, several hours, and why our Capitol Police were put in a situation of doing the best they could, but with just very limited resources. And I saw the videos of Senators Romney and Schumer narrowly escaping the insurrectionists. I saw the video of Eugene Goodman leading the domestic terrorists away from the senators. And I can only say that we were damn lucky. We were damn lucky that these folks weren't successful in their mob violence against the politicians they were looking for, whether it was Pence or whether it was McConnell or whether it was Pelosi or whether it was Schumer or whether it was anybody else that served in either the House or the Senate. We were damn lucky nobody lost their lives, except, and unfortunately, except for the 5 people who did that were part of our police forces and even some of the terrorists. So where do we go from here? It's no surprise what happened. I think the president instigated it. And I think he's empowered a lot of people who they don't like the country the way it's set up, and they're going to do their best to use the Constitution as a background, which they've probably never read, and try to rip this country apart. Where we go from here, in the short term, we have to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So the Capitol and the complex has to be secured. But that is that's a superficial problem. The real problem is, what do we do about the division in this country, and how do we move forward and bring the country back together? That's the problem, and I think it does start with Congress. I think the amount of money that goes into these campaigns has worked to split people apart in Congress. They know that if they make the wrong vote, any one person can dump literally tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in a race against them, which to them isn't a lot of money. To me, is a big pile of money to try to get their way. And so we've got to figure out a way to fend off the amount of money that's going into these campaigns, because I think it's ruining our democracy. And in the meantime, we've got to figure out ways we can work together. Whether it's Joe Manchin or Bernie Sanders or John Bozeman or anybody else, Lisa Murkowski, pick a name, on either side of the aisle, we have to learn how to work together to get things done and be able to disagree without being disagreeable. And I think if we're able to do that, respect one another's opinions, but yet have the debate when the debate is necessary, because I think that's an important part of the legislative process, then I think we can help bring this country back together. I'm a centrist. I've never ever thought of myself as a centrist, but in this world between Bernie and Ted Cruz, yeah, I guess I'm in the center, and that's kind of the way it is, and it's kind of the way I was raised. I don't apologize for it. I believe in our economy, and I believe in capitalism, and I believe that this country can work for all of us. I do think capitalism needs to have sideboards on it, but I still think it has worked well in the past, and I think it continue to work well in the future. We can do some things to help it work better also. So with that, I think we'll just go to questions and answers. I already talked about 10 minutes longer than I usually talk. So with that, I'll kick it over to whoever wants to take the ball and run with it.
Well, Senator Tester. So I set up the background for you, as you can see. Proud of Montana. Grateful to have you here. And since you gave a shout out to me and Lauren, I wanted to choose one of her questions to be the first question we toss at you. So here we go. Our current era of political polarization is often characterized as urban versus rural. Personally, as the daughter of two deeply liberal Montana farmers, I know this is not everyone, but it has been my lived experience that generally holds true. How can the Democratic Party do more to address the needs of rural America?
Or you got to show up, and you've got to show up, and you've got to listen. I mean, the first rule of politics is showing up, and I don't think Democrats in general do a good enough job going to rural America and using two ears and one mouth, listening first and speaking later. And I think that's really important. And I'm not being critical, because oftentimes those are tough conversations to have. But the bottom line is, if you never have them, how can you win people over? And it wasn't very many years ago. In fact, in the 1960s, which is when I first started remembering about what life was about, my folks used to go to Democratic meetings in Choteau County, Montana. And Choteau County, Montana is a deep red right now. But then there were hundreds of people that would show up to these Democratic meetings. This county was, because of the work that FDR during the Depression literally kept people on their farms. This county was pretty damn blue in the 50s and 40s, 50s, and 60s. But we've kind of Democrats haven't done a good job showing up, and we kind of forgot why we're here. To be honest with you, and I attributed a lot of the reasons that we're still on the farm to the policies of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And without him, my grandfather, if he was alive today, would say that we would have lost the farm in the 1930s. But with him, we were able to keep it, and I'm able to farm it some 80 years later, because of what he did 80 or 85 years ago.
Great, thank you. Building off of that, could you speak to how you personally balance your political advocacy for small versus large farming operations? I know they are exceedingly different.
Well, they're extremely different from where you live. Now, let me give you an example, and Kelsey can probably relate to this. The farm that I farm right now is 1,800 acres. That is about a third of the size of the average farm in eastern Montana. So 1,800 acres in eastern Montana is a small farm. Okay, 1,800 acres in Vermont, it would probably be massive. You know what I mean? But take, like I said earlier on, I live in a place where Buffalo had a hard time making a living 150 years ago. They had a hard time surviving here. So this isn't exactly the most lush place in the world, but I'm not complaining. Our family's been able to make it here for over 100 years. So we've done pretty well. But getting to your point, I think my advocacy. Look, I see rural America drying up, and it rips my heart out. Because quite frankly, I think that there's so much opportunity in rural America we're not taking advantage of. And part of it is due to a farm program, quite honestly, that doesn't work. And it hasn't worked for 50, 60 years. And it was set up with the best intentions by FDR, but it's been manipulated to a point where, quite frankly, the people who are getting the bulk of the checks don't really need them. And the people who aren't getting the checks and the people who are not getting checks do need them. So what I would say, I think we need to do, this is going to be really tough. This is going to be as tough as converting to carbonless fuel. But we've got to figure out a way to do more in rural development and rural infrastructure and take the emphasis off of just direct subsidies for crops raised. I think that, and look, I say that knowing that some of those subsidies are absolutely necessary, but some of them go quite counter to our ability to keep people on the land.
Yeah, no, I know that's an issue my dad's been talking a lot about lately, especially with losing markets in China after the trade war. And so I'm going to use another Lauren question and talk about how do you balance interests with expanding international trade and agricultural products with the need to strengthen our local and regional food systems and hopefully be able to do away with the subsidies as you were talking about.
Amen, sister. Look, I think you got to have fair trade agreements, but you can't have a trade philosophy that is my way or the highway, and we're going to go it alone. That doesn't work. It didn't work for Trump at all. And quite frankly, what you need to do if you're going to hold China accountable, and China does need to be held accountable, is you need to have your allies on board, because China's just not screwing us with monetary manipulation and other things. But they're also doing the same thing to Australia and Argentina and countries that we're in competition with as a potential supplier and trading partner with China. So let's get our allies on board, and let's hold China accountable, and let's get trade agreements that are fair and move the ball forward. The problem with the Trump administration is they walked in and they said, we're going to cut off all trade with China. That hurt us on the export markets, and a lot of small businesses that import products, it put them out of business. And it's kind of ironic now that these folks on the Republican side of the aisle in Montana are all fired up about jobs. They weren't too fired up about it when Trump was putting on the trade wars. It just kind of drives me a little bit crazy, because there's a bit of hypocrisy here, if you know what I mean. The bottom line is that we need trade. In Montana, we ship a lot of food products outside of this country's borders. But those trade agreements have to be fair, and they have to work for us, and they have to work for the country we trade with too, by the way. But we can't be taken advantage of. So you got to have people that walk in that have their heads screwed on right, that understand that we can't do it alone. We have to have our allies with us and work to get fair trade deals that work for both countries.
Building off what you mentioned about our allies, it's no secret that the Trump administration decimated a lot of our long-standing political allies with other countries. How do you see the Biden administration moving forward from this wreckage?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that things will ever be the same, because once you do what the President of the United States, President Trump, did to our allies, I don't know that you can ever rebuild those relationships to the point that they once were, because I think they will always ask, what happens if the United States elects another person like that? We're going to be back in the same boat. So I think what Joe Biden is going to do is he's going to do things like rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, which I think is a smart thing to do. I think he's going to do things like try to reinstate some of the things with the Iranian deal, as many as we can, to hold Iran accountable. But I don't know that we'll ever be in a position like we once were with the European Union and others around the world that really saw the United States as the backstop for people who wanted to do evil things. And Joe's going to work hard, and if anybody can reestablish those relationships, and he will get them reestablished, I would say, and this is just a farmer from north central Montana talking, so I would say he'll get them reestablished to a 90% level, but 100% is going to be very difficult to do.
Kind of building off of that, I want to turn to some of your more recent appointments. I know my dad and I are really proud of your most recent appointment as the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense. And so I was wondering if you, now that you have an opportunity to make some monumental changes, if you could share any of those ideas that you have going forward in that position.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I still think, a lot of the research budget goes through the defense appropriations, and I'm a big believer in research, whether it's medical research or whether it's research in alternative energies, energy overall. I think it's really important that we do those kind of make those kind of investments. I think that if we're really, from my perspective, if we really want to focus on something, I would focus on space, and not with a space force. By the way, I think that there's a lot of administrative waste there, but I do think with the role that satellites in particular, lasers, those kind of things are playing from a space standpoint, that we need to make sure we're on top of that game from a defense standpoint, because quite frankly, it's important, and we need to make sure that we're leading the charge there. As far as what I'm going to cut or what I'm going to plus up, besides the stuff, the space stuff, I would say it's probably too early for that. I'm really looking at getting my foundation built about what's in this budget right now, because it's a massive budget. And so I've been meeting with staff, and we've been doing a lot of Q&A sessions with them about what's in the budget, what we need to be paying attention to. And once I get that foundation done, because I just got appointed to this, I've only been in it about a week actually, then we can do even more work.
Great. Kind of building off a theme of money, in your talk, you mentioned money in politics and the problems that it's
Yes.
causing. Would you support efforts to overturn Citizens United, the case that allowed basically unfettered amounts of money into elections via legislation?
Yes, on all the above. I got a lot of bills that I'm carrying to do that, and I'll support anybody who wants to do it. And it doesn't have to be my bill to pass to do it. I'll support it any way it goes. I think Citizens United was a horrible decision. I think any decision that says corporations are people is wrongheaded. I think any decision that allows people to put money in without it being totally transparent is wrongheaded. And I think there ought to be limits on the amount of money that's put into these campaigns, and corporations shouldn't be allowed to put 1 penny of it money in. I feel very strongly about this. Montana has been through this with the Copper Kings 100 years ago, and through people's voted initiative, we limited the influence of corporations in our elections. That was overturned by some of the Supreme Court findings over the last 10 years. And I will tell you that I just think that our democracy will never work as well as it needs to work as long as we have unfettered dollars going into these campaigns. And I can give you some numbers that blow you away. I mean, like my first race in 2006 for the U.S. Senate was about 25 million bucks. Second one was double that. Third one was triple that. The one that Daines and Bullock just got doing was well over $100 million for 500,000 votes.
So to get some of these more progressive policies through, do you think that eliminating the Senate filibuster is a wise or necessary step for advancing this legislative agenda? If not, how will the Democratic agenda?
Yeah, it's a great question, and this may be what makes me a moderate. I don't think it's wise, and I don't think it's necessary yet. I think the filibuster has the intended consequence of bringing people together from both sides to try to find common ground to get to that 60-vote margin. There are some people that have used it as a weapon to try to stop anything from passing. If in fact, and I would approach it from a little different standpoint if it was me and I was in leadership, I would keep people there 7 days a week, 24 hours a day until there was enough peer pressure put on these people who have weaponized the filibuster that they would quit weaponizing it. But I'm not in leadership. And so consequently, what my position has been, we keep the filibuster if it's being abused, and it has been abused in the past, but if it's being consistently abused, I would take a look at changing it.
So one of the things I mentioned in my opening address is that you are one of the more productive senators at crossing the aisle and making compromise. And I just wanted to follow up on that, I think, Montana brand of politics, or your position as a centrist, and how we could kind of learn lessons from you and maybe go forward without eliminating the filibuster and keeping those conversations open.
Well, I think it ultimately starts with whether you're an idealist or a realist. If you're an idealist, I think that it's pretty tough to get anything done, because if it isn't your way, then you don't want it. If it's not your way, then it's a no-go. If it doesn't have everything in it you want, then the hell with it. I'm voting against it. If you're a realist, you're willing to say, you know what, if this bill's got 70% in it that I like and 30% that I can live with, there's no poison pills in it, I'll support it. Well, look, after being married for the last 43 years to the same woman, I can tell you that what I've come to understand is that if you talk, even if you get in the biggest argument in the world, if you still have the ability to talk to one another, you can find out that you may not agree on everything, but you agree on most things. And it's the same thing in politics. And I think that if you're willing to go out and compromise, and compromise isn't a dirty word to you, then you can get a lot of things done. But once again, I would go back to the question that Caitlin asked, and on dollars in politics. This works counter to people wanting to be realists, because those dollars are put in there that if you don't do this, you don't do exactly as I say, then I'm going to spend a whole bunch of money and get you defeated. And that's just wrong. It's just wrong.
Well, thank you for that. Switching gears a little bit, someone asked about the all too predictable result of Trump's second impeachment. How can we hold presidents accountable for their misdeeds? It seems like impeachment, as everything else these days, is more like a partisan fight rather than a sacred constitutional process.
So impeachment is the remedy that the Constitution put forward to hold presidents accountable for what they've done in office. And I feel very strongly in that. I listened to Senator McConnell's speech afterwards that said we should go after Trump in the criminal court. I think that is an incredibly slippery slope. And I'll tell you why. It looks pretty obvious right now. You got a guy that invited people to Washington, D.C. on the 6th. He told them to go to the Capitol and fight like hell. They went to the Capitol. They broke in. Look, it seems pretty obvious to me. He's been doing it since last April to now. Yeah, criminally, he did something wrong. But what about the president who implemented the Farm Bill wrong? Or the person who implemented immigration policy and people didn't like it? Now we're getting to a point where everything the president did, he could be held criminally liable for it. That's not what should be done. The forefathers set up impeachment as a remedy for this. And quite honestly, I have my own thoughts. I think that they're concerned about Trump controlling the money and they'd have no money to go into these races with. I think they're concerned about getting an attack from the right and getting primaried. Both those are probably true, by the way. They're both probably absolutely true, and you need to be concerned about it. But I think as an elected official, you have to ask yourself this very simple question. What's more important? My presence in the United States Senate or this nation's democracy in this republic? And I'm telling you, if you say it's your position in the United States Senate, then you need to get the hell out. Because quite frankly, country always has to be first.
How do you think the contest between the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and former President Trump for control of the GOP will play itself out?
Well, right now, I mean, I think that President Trump has control of the Republican Party, and he's had it for the last 4 or 5 years, and he continues to have control of the Republican Party. I think it could be easily undone if the folks want to undo it. I don't think some want to undo it. And that is that you just got to do the right thing. And enough you do the right thing, then the right thing is done and you move forward. And that might sound easy, but it's pretty easy. I mean, the truth is if 25 people would have voted for impeachment instead of 7, number one, I think he would have been held accountable. I thought the evidence was overwhelming for people to do that. And what are they going to do? What are they going to do to 25 Republicans, over half the caucus in the Senate? They're going to say, wow, maybe we were wrong. And that's been the whole problem here. That's why I was critical of the 12 or 13 people that enabled Trump to be able to make January 6th happen, is because they were saying things that were not the truth. They were repeating the lie. And at some point in time, at least the way I was raised, you can do a lot of things, but if you lie, that's a butt kicking. And quite honestly, they needed to hold President Trump accountable for the lie.
Sort of along.
So how?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No. Okay. Sort of along those lines, we had a previous panelist just speak to the trope that the Democrats are moving to the left while the Republicans are moving to the right, saying that this is not actually the polling numbers. The Democrats are staying consistent with what America is looking for, whereas the Republicans are moving far to the right. I was wondering if you could speak to your experience, if you've seen this play itself out in the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, I think you take a look at Montana right now, we're moving to the right big time. There was a change of administrations from a Democratic governor to a Republican governor, and we're moving right so far, so fast that it's scary. Yeah, I mean, look, I first of all, I don't believe in polls because the last 2 sets have been incredibly bad and wrong. But I would say overall, I think the Republicans are moving further to the right than Democrats are moving to the left. That's been my experience too. I think Democrats are moving to the left, but not nearly as fast as Republicans are moving to the right. I mean, look at the person that was in the presidency for the last 4 years, and look what he did, and look what McConnell's done as leader of the Senate. Stopping Supreme Court nominees. No, I mean, that's not been done before. That's crazy stuff. So yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah, so given this rightward shift, and also given the fact that a lot, when you said you didn't believe too much in polls, but a lot of general polls about Democratic policies, when they are divorced from the Democratic Party, do poll very favorably with American people. How do you think we can convince the public to back the Democratic Party, even though the Republican Party still has control over many of those people?
Well, I think that, messaging is hard work. It really is hard work, and people that are good at it make a lot of money at messaging. And I'm talking about getting your message out so it gets to the people who you need to have do it. But I think that's the key. I mean, I think the key is it's how you message, and if you're able to make those messages be able to connect up with Americans. Look, Kelsey's uncle was probably one of the best political messengers I have ever seen in my life. He was somebody that, and is probably could still do it today, but he was somebody that absolutely could message, and people would go, yeah, that's what I believe. I believe what he's saying. And it's an art. Some people have it instinctually, but it is an art. And those people who are good at it worked at it. And worked with, even the ones that were instinctually had it, they worked at it and they made it even better. And I just think, and look, I'm guilty as charged. I think that for the most part, Democrats are really crappy at message. And that's why you can take a poll and say, do you believe in this, and not attach a party to it, and people will go, yeah. But if you attach Democrat to it, they'll go, no. And I think it's because we're so bad at message.
I was actually listening to a podcast about how the Democrats tend to message as the party against, which triggers a fight mechanism. And so I want to turn to the environment, since we are in an environmental law school and you are on the Committee of the Interior and the Environment. How will you positively message a progressive agenda in that position?
So earlier today, I just got off. A crew came out and did a story from the Circus, Showtime's show. Nod your head if you've ever heard of it. Gosh, I hope you've heard of it. At any rate, what I told them was this: when it came to climate change, I believe in climate change. I think it is real. I think it is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, things we have to deal with in Congress today. But I think we have to use our mind here and say, so is our goal here just to shut off the spigot of carbon-based fuel? Or is our goal here to burn carbon-based fuel cleaner and try to get as much non-carbon energy out there as possible? And I fall in the latter. The XL pipeline has been a big controversial thing here in Montana and in the nation. And I will tell you that the thing that got me going on the interview today more than anything is that it was implied that if you just shut off the spigot, things will change. And they will. Unfortunately, folks like me will be broke by the time we get change implemented. And so what I would do on the Interior Committee is I would do just as I said earlier today. We need to make investments in renewable energy. We need to make sure there's tax credits to push renewable energy forward. We also need to make sure that there's money going into research and development so that people like you and even people younger than you can walk into a lab and figure out how to create energy without carbon. And by the way, the human mind is a wonderful thing. And I think if you give young people in particular the tools that they need to be able to do the kind of research they need, they will be successful. And to further push that effort, I mean, the United States has always been the leader in research. We've always been on the cutting edge. And I think it's one of the reasons we've had the success we've had as a nation over the last 244 years, 245 now, I guess it is. So I think we need to make those investments, and that's what I would push for in Interior.
Kind of building off of that question, we had the terrible snowstorm down in Texas and Oklahoma, and right after, when all the rolling outages were happening with 4 million plus people without power for days, and the Republicans down in Texas blamed the wind turbines in the Green New Deal. We have to address climate change, and we need Republican support to do so. How can we convince the Republican Party that this is something worth fighting for?
Let's see, I'll never get the statement correct. Maria Cantwell, I believe, told me that the Republicans usually come around, but they're usually about 4 years too late. And I think they're going to come around on climate change. Hopefully, it won't be 40 years too late. First of all, you guys, I don't need to correct the record. Hopefully, you already have. I would throw out an expletive right now, but I'll just say it was baloney what they said about wind energy being their problem. Their problem is that they never work to diversify their energy portfolio and their grid and do all the things that need to be done to make sure that what happened there didn't happen. By the way, that storm in Texas, this last few days, a week ago, that storm was in Montana. Did you hear about it on the news? No, we had 35 below for 5 days straight. Okay. And that's not wind chill. That's what it said on the thermometer. All right. So the bottom line, and our grid didn't fail, and we got wind energy, and we got solar energy, we got all that stuff up here. But the truth is that people who are deniers will say anything to try to get their way. And you know, I mean, I would just say that in the end, it's an all the above strategy, and we need to make sure that we're pushing all the above on energy, with the long-term goal of getting to a point where we're burning stuff so clean that our environment will not be going to hell because of climate change. I don't know that I answered your question because I got off the road there, but go ahead.
Well, while Montana was suffering those negative 35 days, which I heard a lot about from my mom, but not in the news, did you go to Cancun to escape the cold?
Now I was I was in Washington D.C., but trust me, I would have loved to have been here because even a 35 below day in Montana is better than a 35 above day in D.C.
Yeah. But a more serious question. What gave you the courage to stop Trump's appointment of the doctor in the VA?
What gave me the courage to do it?
Yeah.
My job. It was my job to make sure that people were vetted appropriately. Just to recount a little history, I had a lot of folks, many of them were involved in the service or retired from the service, come up to me and say, this is not the right guy for the job. I've confirmed people before, and I had never got that kind of a response out of a nominee. And what complicated is I was up for election too. And I was in cycle. He put forth a person who had to be challenged. We challenged that person because it was my job to do that. By the way, he pulled his name out of the hat, but he could have fought if he was if he really believed that my accusations were bogus. He could have fought them, and I was willing to listen. But in the end, it was my job, and I had to ask myself the same question that I asked you guys, and that was, should I shut up and just basically have a fairly easy election? Because that's what it looked like at that moment in time. Or should I do my job? And if I lose, I lose. I will have done my job. And I came to the conclusion that doing my job was more important than my reelection. And if I did my job, I still had the belief that the people of the state of Montana would see that as being the right thing to do and would reelect me. And that's exactly what happened. But trust me, I would have probably had a much easier election if I would have done nothing. If he would have got confirmed, I guarantee the veterans of this nation, including the ones that live in Montana, would have been poorly served.
Yeah, I remember following that Trump campaigned in Montana 4 or 5 times, actually visited Montana, but you prevailed. And I'm wondering, do you think that means that Donald Trump still has a hold on the Republican Party in Montana?
Absolutely does. Unequivocally, no doubt about it. Yes. Was I clear enough?
Yes. Going back to veterans, you are now the chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee. What do you see as most important going forward to help our nation's veterans?
So I think probably the most important thing is just making sure there's the oversight to make sure things like the John Scott Hannon bill is implemented correctly, which is a mental health bill for our veterans. I think making sure that our women veterans are taken care of and respected within the VA is critically important. I think making sure the electronic health records continues to move forward and gets done. We pump billions of dollars into that, and it seems to be still lackluster. I think making sure that our veterans have access to job training and education benefits is really important. So overall, it's oversight of the bills that we passed, because we passed a lot of bills over the last 3 years. I would say, as far as legislation getting passed moving forward, I think that making sure that the Vietnam veterans get the coverage from Agent Orange, the folks who have hypertension still are not covered, and they need to be covered because there's a direct medical scientific correlation between Agent Orange exposure and hypertension, high blood pressure. I think the same thing is true with the burn pits. The science, as soon as the science is there, and I think it's there in a lot of cases, burn pit exposure creates all sorts of problems, and we need to deal with that. And here's the deal. I mean, the reason hypertension didn't get covered in Agent Orange 3 months ago when we did bladder cancer and hypothyroidism and Parkinsonism is because of the cost. And my point is if we're going to send folks off to war, taking care of them when they get back home is a cost of war. So you better damn well know that when you send them off, or don't send them off to begin with.
Well, Senator Tester, we're actually at time. I can't believe how quickly this flew by. I was wondering if you wanted to put in any last words before we wrap up the evening.
Yeah, so Kelsey, I got a question for you. I assume I'm talking to a bunch of law students, correct?
Yeah, a bunch of law students. We also have several master's programs at VLS that all focus on a lot on energy and restorative justice and environmental law.
Cool.
And
Cool.
And then also, because of the virtual nature, we have students chiming in from across the country. And I know my parents are watching, so they've texted me a couple questions.
That's good. That's good. Walt and Cindy, hi, how are you? At any rate, I just want to say this. You guys are the future of this country. I can tell you that my generation has not done a stellar job as far as where we've come from and where we've gone. We started out with a budget balance, surplus, and we've ended up borrowing from you guys. That is not what I would consider a successful model. And I would tell you that it takes people like the two I'm looking at and everybody else that's on here virtually. It takes you guys stepping up and getting in leadership positions, whether it's elected or not elected, and working hard and making sure this country is around for another 240 years. The forefathers were an incredibly ingenious bunch of folks that were amazingly had amazing vision, and we need to get back to that. And it's going to happen when you guys take over. And so, I told you I got the bug for this when I was 16 years old, and never once did I ever think I was going to be a United States senator. I was hoping I could make it to the state legislature, or maybe a county commissioner, or I didn't live in a town, so city council wasn't a possibility. But all those positions are really important, and you've got to have good people who are willing to think and use their mind in those positions. And I would just encourage all of you to get involved in your community to make it a better place. And when the door of opportunity opens, don't look at it as something you don't want to do. Look at it as something, when that opportunity door opens, that you can do and make your world and make the world around you a better place. And so that's my only advice. you guys just need to step it up, and the sooner you do, the better off this country's going to be. And that's about all I got. Best I can do under
Well,
the circumstances.
that's perfect, Senator Tester. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It was such a pleasure to have this conversation with you and to hear you speak. And with that, that concludes volume 45's symposium. So we just want to thank everyone so much for joining us. And hopefully we'll be able to see you all in person soon. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.